Episode 1, The Bell That No One Rings. God is not absent. Sometimes, he's just not answering from the side we expect. The first bell rang at 3:17 a.m. Not once, not twice, but 7 slow chimes, drawn out like a warning left unfinished. Raphael da Costa sat upright in his bed at the diocesan guest house. He wasn't dreaming. The sound was real, ancient, and vibrating in his spine. He stepped to the window. The chapel stood less than 100 meters away. Small, covered in moss. Its roofline bowed with age. Its single bell tower crooked, like a finger too long unbent. But no one was there. And yet, the bell was still swinging. He'd been sent by the Archdiocese in Lisbon, officially, to catalog relics and bless the forgotten chapel before renovations. Unofficially, to keep the villagers from asking questions they weren't qualified to understand. Because the chapel, Igreja de São Abel, had been sealed since 1708. No priest had entered it. No mass had been held. No key had ever been found. And yet, at exactly 3:17 a.m., the bell rang. Every single night at dawn, Raphael walked into the village square. Old men stopped talking when he passed. One woman clutched her rosary tighter, muttering something about O Menino de Porta, the boy of the door. A grocer named Vitor finally spoke. You're the 4th to come since 1985. None of them stayed past the 7th night. Raphael forced a smile. Why is the church sealed? Vitor wiped his hands. Because we needed somewhere to put the voice. Raphael blinked. The voice. The one that answered back when no one prayed. That evening, Raphael returned to the chapel. It stood quiet now, humble, weather-worn. A single oak door, nailed shut with rusted iron bands. Its frame carved with Latin he didn't recognize, except for one phrase, repeated 3 times. Non aperias. Do not open. He placed his palm against the door. It was warm. From inside, a sound, not a voice, a breath, low, deep, as if the building was asleep, or waiting. He turned to leave, but on the ground by the threshold, he saw a coin, old, cracked. On one side, the face of a saint. On the other, an eye, staring straight at him. That night, he didn't sleep, and when the bell rang again, it said his name. Episode 2, The Gospel of Abel. There are books the church never banned, because to ban them would mean admitting they were real. Raphael didn't tell the diocese about the voice. He told himself it was stress, jet lag, a spiritual echo, but the bell kept calling his name. And so, on the 3rd morning, he did what every priest was warned never do in a holy place he didn't understand. He went looking alone. The sacristy was sealed off, dust thick like velvet. Wooden beams bent low as if the house of God was hiding its neck. Raphael lit a candle, praying out loud, not for safety, but for permission. He found a loose stone by accident, a small shift in the floor tile. Beneath it, a book wrapped in oilcloth, sealed with a cross made of 2 human finger bones. He almost dropped it. The smell of it, iron, oil, and old breath. But curiosity has always been the first step toward revelation. He brought it back to the rectory, cut the seal, and opened the cover. There was no title, just a sentence carved by blade, not ink. The lamb did not die in vain. He died so Abel would be remembered. Raphael turned the page. The writing was in old Aramaic and Latin, tangled together, as if the text itself couldn't agree on which God it served. But he could read enough to understand the name. Evangelium Abilis, the Gospel of Abel. Abel, the son of Adam, the first to bleed, the first to be sacrificed. There was no Gospel of Abel in the Bible, because this one was never canonized. It spoke of a God that bled, a God that could feel betrayal, a God who whispered to Abel as he died, I will not stop what is coming, but I will be with you behind the door. Raphael shivered. The text described a structure, a place of locking, stones sealed in ritual, blood-marked lintels, a location built not to contain evil, but to protect it from a world, or perhaps to protect the world from it. And at the very end of the chapter, The church called it chapel, but we called it his cell. That night, Raphael stared at the door again. The wind blew gently. The bell didn't ring, but he heard breathing from behind the oak again. This time, he put his ear to it, and what he heard made him fall to his knees. A whisper in his own voice, saying, "You are able now." Episode 3, The Eye and the Cross. Faith tells you the cross sees you. No one asks what happens when it blinks. The crucifix above the altar had been there for centuries. Worn, weathered, its Christ carved from olive gone nearly black with time. His face serene, frozen in eternal agony. Or at least, it used to be. Raphael had returned to the chapel at dusk. He hadn't meant to. His suitcase was packed. His transfer request had already been sent. But something, not curiosity, not duty, something called, not with words, with presence, as though the chapel was no longer waiting to be entered. It was waiting to wake up. The air was thicker that evening, heavier. The candlelight didn't flicker. It stood perfectly still. Raphael approached the altar and dropped to one knee. It wasn't prayer. It was instinct, like something holy or hungry was watching. That's when he noticed it. The crucifix was wrong. Not the arms, not the wounds, the face. Christ's eyes, once closed, were now half-lidded, looking slightly downward, right at him. He stood up fast, stumbling backward. The silence cracked, not with sound, but with knowing. And then the eye blinked. Once, slowly, with groaning like breath pulled through ancient lungs. Raphael froze. His legs wouldn't obey him. And the crucifix began to weep. Not tears. Sap, thick golden red, like blood kissed with honey. It dripped from the eyes, the palms, the side. He moved closer. And in the sap, tiny symbols shimmered, faint but unmistakable. Letters, forming a single word. Unlock. The air shifted. The door at the back of the chapel creaked, though no wind stirred. He turned, but there was no one. When he looked back, the crucifix had changed again. The Christ was smiling, not in comfort, but in recognition. Raphael fled, ran across the courtyard, back to the rectory, heart pounding like a hymn gone mad. But when he opened his journal to record what happened, he found a page already written, not in his handwriting. It read, "The cross does not weep for what is lost. It weeps for what remembers." That night, the bell rang again. But this time, no one else in the village heard it, because it was inside his chest. Episode 4, The Last Confession of Father Simeo. It wasn't madness that made him smile. It was the relief of no longer being the only one who knew. Raphael found the letter behind the altar wall. He wasn't looking for it. He was cleaning sap from the floor where the crucifix had wept 2 nights before, when the panel came loose. Hollow wood, a gap in the stone. Inside, a scroll wrapped in linen soaked with salt and ash. The name was scrawled across the top, in a trembling black hand. Confessio Ultima, P. Simeo du Rosario. The last known priest assigned to a grave at the Sao Abel. Declared missing in 1708. Presumed dead. No body was ever recovered. No mass held in his name. No prayer spoken on his behalf. Until now, Raphael unrolled the scroll. The handwriting was erratic but deliberate. Parts in Latin, parts in Portuguese. But most of it was something older, a script he couldn't read but felt. The letter began not with a salutation, but with a scream, written out, ink pressed deep into the parchment. It breathes on the stone. And it does not sleep. It prays back. Father Simeo described his final days in the chapel. He claimed to have heard chanting from beneath the floor. He described the voice of a child, reciting psalms that had never been written, in tones no human throat should form. He fasted. He begged. He bled from the ears for 9 nights. And then, on the 10th night, it spoke my name. It asked me what I loved most in this world. I said, the Lord. It said, prove it. So I opened the floor. The scroll was burnt after that. Half a page gone. But the final sentence remained. Clear, precise, terrifying. It is not evil, Raphael. It is older than evil, and it is remembering itself through you. Raphael dropped the scroll. His mouth tasted of iron. The air grew thick. And from beneath the chapel floor, once again, a breath. Only this time, it wasn't behind the door. It was beneath his feet. The stone trembled. And a voice, familiar, terrible, soft, whispered, "You read it. Now you're part of it." Episode 5. God is in the walls. If the church was meant to hold him in, why does it feel like it's holding the rest of us out? The walls began to change on the 5th night. Not cracking, not collapsing, breathing. Raphael first noticed it when he returned to the chapel before sunrise. The candle he'd left burning had melted into the floor, not dripped, but been absorbed like the stone had drunk the wax. The iconography along the walls, saints and angels carved into fading plaster, had shifted, not moved, turned. Their heads were now all tilted slightly downward, their eyes aligned to stare at the floor beneath the altar, at the door, at what was underneath it. Raphael approached the west wall, the oldest part of the chapel. He pressed his hand to it, and the wall pressed back, faintly, softly, like skin resisting a fingertip, like something sleeping just beneath the surface. The mural there had once been a faded painting of the Ascension. Now, the Christ figure was missing his face, and around him, the disciples' mouths had been erased, as if silence had been painted over their screams. He stumbled backward, breath short, then heard it, a hum, low, feminine, coming from the stone. It wasn't a voice. It was a prayer without words, vibrating like a hymn inside a lung that had waited 300 years to exhale. And it said, "Open." Later that day, Raphael spoke to Vitor again, the grocer. "Has anyone ever tried to tear down the church?" The old man looked up from his bread. 2 men tried. In 1911, revolutionaries. "What happened?" Vitor blinked slowly. One went blind. The other dug through the stone and found blood. They say the wall was weeping, and the weeping didn't stop until the bishop cut out their tongues. That night, Raphael stayed in the chapel. The crucifix above no longer smiled. Its face had been erased. In its place, a faint imprint. Not a face. An eye, wide, open, etched deep behind the wood grain, like it had always been there, waiting. The walls began to pulse. The incense in the air thickened, but no one had lit any, and the Latin scripture etched above the nave began to glow faintly, not golden, red, as if blood remembered what it had once written. Raphael felt his knees. The floor was warm now, soft, and when he whispered, "Lord," the wall whispered back, "I am not where you think I am." Episode 6. Faith without light. True faith is believing even when there's no answer. But what if the answer comes too fast? On the 6th night, Raphael prayed, and something answered immediately. No delay, no silence, just response. He had been kneeling in the nave, hands clasped, whispering an old prayer in Latin, one he hadn't used since seminary. Not for power, not for protection, just for peace. Domini adiuva me. And then, without warning, a voice, clear and close, whispered, "What do you want, Raphael?" He flinched, turned. No one, only the candles, now lit, though he hadn't touched them, all 13, standing like silent witnesses. The voice had come from behind the altar, but there was no one there, only the door and the wall, still sealed, still warm, still breathing. He didn't tell anyone. He just waited, and the next day, the answers kept coming. When he opened the Gospel of Abel again, new ink had appeared, fresh, damp. "Ask, and I will hear. Speak, and I will become." He whispered a test under his breath. "Show me the truth." The mirror in the rectory shattered. Behind it, carved into the stone, you were never praying to silence. By the 3rd day, it got worse. Or, clearer, he stopped choosing his own words. He would begin a prayer and finish it in a language he didn't speak. He would think it out and feel pressure on his chest, soft at first like breath, then sharper like a nail pressed lovingly against skin. He dreamed of light, but not warm, blinding, bladed, light that wanted to be inside him. And then the chapel responded. The pews were rearranged when he awoke. The candles bent inward, forming a circle. And in the center, a book, not the Gospel of Abel, a new one, untitled, but when he touched it, it hissed, and a line burned across the cover. Faith without light is honest, but light without truth is punishment. He opened to the first page, blank, then slowly, a sentence appeared, as if written from beneath the page. You're not praying anymore, Raphael. You're being written into the prayer. That night, he lit no candles. He just sat and waited, and at 3:17 a.m., the bell rang once, and a voice, neither male nor female, old nor young, spoke on the floor beneath the altar. We heard you. Now let us in. Episode 7. The silence is not empty. She was silent for 40 years. Not because she forgot, but because the voice inside her never stopped whispering. Her name was Sister Ines. No one had spoken it aloud in decades, not since she fled the chapel barefoot, bleeding from the ears, and declared that God had been left behind a door the church was too afraid to open. They called her mad. They sent her to a convent in Madeira. She never spoke again. Until now, Raphael received a letter in a plain envelope, no return address. Inside, only two things. A page torn from an old Bible, Genesis 4 verse 10, the blood of Abel crying out, underlined in crimson, and a message handwritten. I heard the same voice, and I still wake up speaking in tongues I never learned. She arrived in the village at sunset, wearing black and no veil. Her eyes were pale and unfocused, like they'd seen too much or too far. When Raphael met her in the chapel, she didn't bow. She didn't cross herself. She walked straight to the altar, placed both hands on the floor, and whispered, "It's closer now." They sat in the rectory for hours. Raphael asked about the voice. Ines didn't answer with words. She pulled up her sleeve. Her arm was covered in scars, symbols, not random, each one precise, ancient, familiar. He recognized one, etched into the spine of the Gospel of Abel. "It speaks in feeling," she finally said. "It doesn't lie. That's why it's dangerous. It tells you exactly what you asked to know, even if you aren't ready to carry it." Raphael asked what she heard last, the night she left. She closed her eyes, and then, in a voice that was not hers, she spoke. He was not the first to die. He was the first to understand. Abel didn't just bleed. He opened something. The air in the room changed. Heavy, sacred, candles flickered. None had been lit, and the crucifix on the wall tilted. Raphael backed away. Sister Ines smiled faintly. "They told you to pray. They didn't tell you what would pray back." That night, Raphael returned to chapel. The floor was damp, not with water, with breath. The stone beneath his feet rose slightly, as if swelling with something beneath. And from the wall, the one with no scripture, no mural, came a voice. She remembered. "Now you must." Episode 8. The key is flesh. It didn't want a password. It wanted something warm, something still pulsing. Sister Ines had waited until the sky turned black and the wind held still, what she called the hour when faith becomes soft. She didn't bring a Bible. She brought a knife. Small, curved, worn with use. The kind of blade that doesn't slice to hurt, but to mark. They stood in the chapel before the altar. The crucifix had fallen days ago. Now, only the door remained. Its ancient oak glowed faintly under the candlelight, as if it were breathing again. Raphael's voice trembled. "You said there was a ritual." Ines nodded. "Not written, not spoken, only done." She took his hand and placed the blade between his fingers, then guided his palm to his own chest. "The key is not hidden," she said. "It's waiting to be offered." Raphael hesitated. To who? Sister Ines stared at the door. To whatever's still listening. Because silence is never empty. He pressed the blade to his chest, below the collarbone, over the heart. The cut was shallow, but intentional. Blood bloomed like an opening prayer. He stepped forward, and the door responded. The carvings lit up not with fire, but with heat, steam, sweat. The Latin letters etched across its frame shimmered and rearranged themselves into a phrase. Fides carnis, faith of flesh. The ground trembled behind them. The walls groaned as if waking from centuries of sleep. A wind swept through the sealed chapel. Though no windows were open, candles went out, then relit, but now in reverse order, as if time had turned inside out. Ines knelt, not in fear, in preparation. Raphael stood frozen. Blood dripped from his chest onto the stone, and when it hit, the door inhaled. A sound, wet, hungry, ancient. Then came the whisper, from inside the wood, from beneath the chapel, from behind the veil of every unanswered prayer he'd ever spoken. Bring the rest. Bring all of you. Episode 9, the door whispers back. When a voice speaks your name from behind a sealed door, you don't wonder how it knows you. You wonder how long it's been waiting. The first voice came at 3:17 a.m., not as wind, not as echo, as a name. Raphael, soft, familiar, and impossible, because it was the voice of his mother, dead 17 years. He froze in the center of the chapel, blood still dry on his chest from ritual. Sister Ines slept in the back pew, breathing evenly, unaware that the door had begun to sweat. Tiny droplets of something viscous slid down the grain. Not water, not oil, something syrupy, translucent, like tears drawn from bone. Raphael, the voice said again, "You left me in the ground, but I'm not resting." He stepped closer. His hands trembled. "What do you want?" he whispered. The door breathed in, and then another voice, deeper, sharper, masculine. "Why didn't you open it sooner?" He collapsed, because that voice didn't belong to the dead. It belonged to someone who never died. His twin brother, Matthias, gone since they were 12, vanished without trace. Presumed drowned in the river, but no body was ever found. Raphael crawled to the door, forehead against the wood, voice cracking. "Matthias? How?" Silence. Then, "I'm not behind the door. I am the door." He staggered back. Ines woke instantly, eyes wide. "You heard it," she whispered. Raphael nodded. It knew him. It spoke as him. She placed her hand on his shoulder, trembling. That's how it tests you. It doesn't lie. It remembers. Later, Raphael opened the Gospel of Abel again. The ink had bled. Letters ran like tears down the page. And in the margins, a phrase had been added. In the same crimson script as before. The voice does not come from beyond. It comes from what you buried inside. That night, he dreamed of Matthias, not as a boy, but grown, standing barefoot at the altar, face split with a smile that knew things Raphael had never told anyone. And behind him, the chapel walls bent inward, pulsing like a womb about to give birth. He woke with a gasp, and carved into floor, beside his bed, was one word: welcome. Episode 10, Abel's Warning. A prophecy is only terrifying if it remembers your name before you ever spoke it. The torn page was found behind the altar stone. Raphael hadn't meant to search, but the door hadn't whispered in 2 nights, and the silence felt worse than any voice. The fragment was hidden inside a leather pouch, sealed with red wax. Old, fractured, but the parchment within was fresher than it had any right to be, as if it waited to be found only now. At the top, in a language Raphael recognized from the earlier chapters, Capit Novissimum, final chapter. Beneath it, symbols, drawn in blood, still dark, still wet. They curled like vines, forming a shape. An eye, encircling a single word. Raphael. He staggered back, heart pounding, but it got worse. As the ink began to move, letters reshaping, lines shifting, and then a full phrase emerged. He who hears the bell on the 7th night is not called by God. He is chosen by the silence beneath him. The page burned in his hand. Not flame, heat, from the words. as if meaning itself had become alive, as if belief had mass and it now pushed back. Sister Ines appeared in the doorway, face pale. "You read it, didn't you?" "It called me." She nodded. "It calls only once, and never without price." They returned to the chapel. The door was different. Open? No. Still sealed. But the space around it had been inward, like time itself leaned toward it. And the carvings on the surface now whispered constantly, not words, names. Thousands of them. All the same name. His name. Raphael. 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 He placed the final page against the door, and it stuck, absorbed into grain like breath into skin. The voices stopped. The walls trembled. And the crucifix, now nothing more than scorched wood, cracked down the center. From the opening in the beam, something fell. Not dust, not a relic. A tooth, human, fresh, still bleeding. Raphael looked at Ines. Her face was blank. Her eyes, wet. "What is this?" She whispered, "It's not a door, Raphael. It's a mouth." Episode 11. The church that prays on its own. You can silence a man. You can silence a priest. But when the church itself begins to pray, there is nothing left to do but listen. The first chant began at 2:59 a.m. Low, monotone, no instrument, no voice, just vibration, as if the stone was remembering a sound it had once been forced to forget. Raphael shot up in bed. His chest ached, not with pain but with rhythm. His heart was beating in time with the hum in the floorboards. He stepped barefoot into the hall. The chapel doors were closed, but candlelight flickered beneath the crack, though no candles had been lit since the crucifix fell. He pressed his ear to the wood. It wasn't just chanting. It was liturgy, a full mass, in Latin, but older than Latin, a tongue made for no human mouth. The words slipped like oil over salt, sweet, burning, wet. He understood none of it, and yet his knees buckled. His body recognized the sound before his mind did. He pushed open the chapel doors and stopped. Every pew was full, but no one sat in them. Only shadows, clear outlines of shoulders, veils, folded hands, as if the walls had projected the memory of worshippers onto the air, all facing the altar, all bowing. The bell above tolled once. The walls trembled, and in that moment, the chapel exhaled. Adveniat. Raphael felt his knees. Sister Ines stood beside him, pale, eyes wide. "They're not praying to something," she whispered. "They're praying through it." He looked up at the altar. The door behind it was now glowing faintly, like breath against glass. A new word had appeared on its surface, etched from the inside. Eki. Behold. And then a moment of silence. No sound, no echo, until the floor beneath them whispered, "One more step, Raphael. One more wound. Then the mouth will open." He turned to Ines, tears in his eyes. "What happens when it opens?" She answered without blinking. The prayers stop, and the answer begins. Episode 12. The door opens inward. Some doors open with keys, some with blood. This one opens when you forget who you were. Raphael had fasted for 3 days. No bread, no water, no prayer, only silence, because to speak now would be to name himself. And that was the final barrier. Sister Ines prepared the circle at the altar, not with chalk, not with salt, but with ashes, drawn from the pages of the Gospel of Abel, now burned into a black spiral around the door. "No more relics," she whispered. "No more scripture. It wants the soul, not the symbols." The door no longer looked like wood. It pulsed. It listened. The names it once whispered were gone. Now it murmured memories. Raphael's childhood, his father's hands, the river where Matthias disappeared. "You will forget them," it said, "and in return you will remember me." He stepped into the circle. The light dimmed, but not from candle or sun. From within, as though God blinked, Ines knelt, facing away from the altar. She would not witness this. because no one truly watches a man unmake himself. Raphael placed his hand to his chest, not to wound it, but to feel the beat. For the last time as himself, he whispered, "I give you my name." And in that moment, the chapel shuddered. The spiral of ash rose into the air, swirling like a veil. The walls moaned, and the door pulled inward, not swung, not opened, inhaled. Behind it, darkness, not empty, but crowded with memory. Other priests, other saints, other chosen ones who had entered and been rewritten. Raphael took one step inside. Instantly, he felt it. His mother's voice gone, Matea's face fading, his baptism, his first love, the moment he first believed in God, all unraveling, not erased, absorbed. He didn't cry. He smiled, because now he finally understood. The door was not punishment. It was inheritance. And Raphael was never chosen to guard it. He was born to complete it. The last thing he heard before everything dissolved was Sister Ines whispering, "Amen." Episode 13. This is not the God you remember. You thought God left. He didn't. He was waiting for someone who would stop calling his name and start becoming it. The door was open, not broken, not torn, yielded, like a mouth smiling, like a womb accepting. Inside, nothing, at first, and then movement. The darkness did not rush out. It stepped, deliberate, graceful, like it remembered how to walk. What emerged was not a figure. It was a feeling made flesh, something that remembered light the way a scar remembers fire. It stood at the altar, breathed in, and the chapel sighed with it. Sister Ines collapsed, weeping. You were supposed to be a name, not a man. The thing turned to her, spoke with Raphael's voice. But it wasn't Raphael anymore. It was his echo, completed. I kept a face so you would listen. But I no longer need ears. I need mouths. The walls cracked open, not stone, skin. The church pulsed like an organ. The pews bled. The crucifix melted into the altar like wax over the memory of guilt. And then it began to pray, not in Latin, not in tongues, in breath. Each inhale, a sermon. Each exhale, a rewriting of the world. Outside, the village bells rang, not by hands, by memory, all at once, all together, calling not to the faithful, but to the forgotten. Ines crawled to the altar, tried to look into his face, but it was not light. It was a mirror, and in it she saw herself, naked, kneeling, mouth open, speaking a language she did not know, but could never unlearn. "What are you?" she whispered. He leaned close, voice honeyed and terrifying. "I am the answer that never needed your question. I am what Abel saw before he bled. And now, you will see me too." The world did not burn. It shifted, from worship to recognition, from faith to function. And when the final candle went out, so did the distinction between inside and outside, between heaven and beneath, between Raphael and what came after. There was no closing of the door, because the door was no longer needed. It had done its part. It had opened inward,